excited.
Such a puppy.
What's up everybody, how's it going? It's Burke, aka Dansgwait here, and I'm coming at you with a very special video that I hope everyone is going to enjoy. I have been in the content creation space for a very long time, and in all my years of doing this, I have not had an opportunity like this one ever before. I have indeed played some Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I'm making this video to talk about my experience. I'm excited to tell you guys about what I got up to and what I experienced with the demos that I played for the game. So first of all, a little bit of background. Recently, Square Enix reached out to me and they said we are hosting a little demo kind of event session where we're inviting a few people to come into the Square Enix studios and have a chance to play some early access content from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, I have been excited about Rebirth from the very start. I've always been an outspoken fan of Final Fantasy VII Remake, and especially now that the story goes out beyond Midgar, I have been hyped and excited from the start. 7 Rebirth was always the game that I was most excited about in terms of Square Enix's future. So when this opportunity came, I was more than happy to take it. And so about a week ago, as of recording this voiceover, I was in the Square Enix offices playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. And so I will now talk to you guys about what I experienced. I will try to do it in like a classic Dansgwait style, where I have a bit more of a semi-scripted casual approach and just talking about what I saw, what I experienced, what I felt, what I liked, what I didn't like, and hopefully that should help to paint a picture for you guys of what I got to experience from 7 Rebirth so far. Now, just for some background, they did say to me that when you come in and play these demos, you are able to record your own footage, or you can just use the B-roll that we have given you. Now for this, because I'd never done an event like this before, I didn't want to take a risk and try to bring a setup and get it working, because we had very limited time. And so I thought by the time I get this set up, then I'm going to waste a lot of precious gameplay time. And so what I did was to rely on the B-roll. So anything that you're seeing as background footage in this video that's from 7 Rebirth, this is from Square Enix themselves. This is like the approved B-roll that I'm allowed to show you guys from the game. So it's not me playing in the background. So I wanted to make sure that was clear before continuing. So let's get into it and talk about Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and the 2 demos that I got to play. The first demo that we got was from the Cloud and Sephiroth flashback section in Nibelheim, which was really interesting to be able to play. And the second demo was a much more open demonstration of what the game is going to look like when you're more out in the world and able to explore and traverse the larger areas that are present in the game. Now, of course, these are demos. Things might be different in the final release, and these demos are always never going to be exactly the same as how you experience them in the full game. They're going to give you potentially different equipment, different materia, your level's going to be different, so just take everything with a pinch of salt. But in terms of the general experience that they want you to see and to play, a lot of it, of course, is going to be very similar to what you can expect from the final game. So I'm going to break down this video into 3 sections. The first is going to be about exploration / traversal. For me at least, this is one of the single most impressive things from the demo experience, because this has been such an important and pivotal question in the build-up to 7 Rebirth. What are they going to do about the open world? Because obviously from the original, you leave Midgar and you find yourself in this big expanse, you're in the overworld map, and you get a lot more freedom in where you can go and how you can get there. What we got to see is that it's likely going to fall into 2 categories. The first one, from Demo 1, is a much more linear section that you're going to be familiar with from 7 Remake. Of course, there's going to be times when you're in more restricted areas, like let's say mines and caves, or you're doing a flashback section where you're not really supposed to have a lot more freedom in how things happen, and this is going to look very familiar, so that's obviously a given. But the second demo is literally called the Open Wilds of Junon, and this was the bit that truly impressed me, and this is the bit that's obviously radically different from Final Fantasy VII Remake in a really good way. So the Open Wilds of Junon, I would say, is a pretty generously sized region that is definitely more advisable to travel on with a chocobo. So that's already a clear sign. We've also seen from recent trailers as well that there's a lot of emphasis on chocobos. We've got the different colors of chocobos that have different abilities when it comes to traversal as well, and they really are making use of chocobos quite heavily in this game. That's of course an obvious indication that the reason this is true is because traversal and exploration is going to be a big element of the game, and the size of the areas makes chocobo use much more efficient and fun. Given that this demo area is literally just one part outside of Junon, you have to assume that there's going to be a lot more of these type of bigger open areas that you're going to be able to explore as well, of varying sizes. Now, first off, visually, I thought the environments looked great. I did play a little bit of Final Fantasy VII Remake on the PS5, the PS5 version of the game, and it looks great. I mean, I don't think many people really complained about how Final Fantasy VII Remake looked anyway. It looked fantastic. Now, this game, it does have that little bit of edge over Final Fantasy VII Remake, so they have upped the ante a little bit more. To me, it looks fantastic. Again, I didn't have any complaints. I thought the visuals were excellent, and I think for almost everybody playing, it's not going to be an element that's going to diminish your experience at all. I can't really comment too much on stuff like frame rate and graphics and that kind of thing. Just sort of look at what you got in the B-roll and see how you feel about how slick it looks, how smooth it looks, and how satisfying it looks visually. Now, the standout aspect of the exploration for me was that they had an approach that felt both cohesive and rewarding. Now, what I mean by that is that the implementation of something like the chocobos, for example, they were very easy to use, their maneuverability was nice. Exploring around, it did feel very intuitive, and it's the kind of exploration that as you begin to do it, you start to get sucked in, and you start to sort of almost forget about like random encounters, what's going on in the story, and you really start to get immersed into exploring the area. So straight away, once you're on the chocobo, you immediately begin to notice that there's a lot of items scattered around the ground. Like, these aren't stuff like potions or anything like that. They're clearly crafting related items. They're smaller items, they're very easy to pick up, and you'll start to rack those up very quickly. And so already when you're exploring around, there's going to be motivation to sort of pick up everything that you see, especially when you're on the back of the chocobo. And it's all very quick and very slick. You don't feel like it's a chore to pick these things up. And so that's something that I immediately enjoyed. And straight away, you get this sort of intuitive motivation to begin exploring the map. And once you go into the map menu, you see that you're working with a pretty big region. And that as you explore more of it, more of the map is going to fill out and you're going to get to see specifics. Of course, as you explore around, as you're seeing from the B-roll too, there's plenty to see and do in these areas. There's a lot of buildings, there's a lot of chests as well, there's going to be NPCs, there's going to be points of interest. And for me, one of the things I immediately liked a lot was that while you're on the chocobo, much like the Final Fantasy IX and Final Fantasy XIII style, you have a way to sniff out and find items using your chocobo. Now, this is something that I really enjoyed about Final Fantasy XIII as well. I remember it clearly, where you'd have the exclamation mark pop, and depending on whether you were getting closer or not, like the bouncing of the exclamation mark would speed up and you'd find items that could sometimes be really useful. Now, this game has that too, which I think is really cool. And so again, that's another feature where when you're on the back of the chocobo, you're going to want to start exploring, and the items that you do find while you're on the back of the chocobo seem to be pretty good, and so it is rewarding and worth doing. Already within a few minutes you realize that there's plenty to do, and for me at least, once I started playing this demo, I got really sucked into the exploration element, and a lot of the best games in this field, let's say stuff like Witcher 3, Breath of the Wild / Tears of the Kingdom, and Elden Ring, they all have this kind of magic quality where you kind of forget about everything else and you really get immersed and sucked into the exploration. So in Rebirth, there's signs that it at least has some of that similar type of energy and feel. Like, for example, when you're on the chocobo, sometimes you'll see this baby chocobo and it's basically like kind of beckoning you to follow it. And so once you start following it, it will lead you to a choco stop. And there is basically where you can create like a fast travel point. It's also a point where you can heal your HP and MP if you have an item called a cushion. And it feels to me like these elements are coming together nicely to create an exploration experience that feels quite organic, it feels rewarding, and it's quite efficient as well. So as you continue to explore the region, you're going to find more chocobo spots, you're going to find more points of interest, and then eventually when you go into the map, let's say you've got from one end of the other, and you want to like go back to near the start to explore some more, there's lots of fast travel opportunities. Now in the main game, will it be exactly like that? I'm not too sure. But in the demo at least, especially in these open areas, they make it quite easy and intuitive to explore the first time, but then when you want to reach specific points, you don't have to always ride around everywhere all the time. It's quite quick to fast travel between different parts of the region as well, which I thought was nice. So overall, I would say from about the half an hour or so I had to explore this Junon area, the traversal and the exploration play a much bigger role in this experience than it did for the remake. And while we actually have a chocobo theme again, Final Fantasy XVI. So what about random encounters and enemies in these open regions? Now, they had a bit of an interesting approach here. Now, I'm not sure how this one's going to translate to the full game, but at least in the demo, what we had was that in this area we had 4 different groups of enemies, and they've created this thing about collecting regional information / intel. And the way you do that is by exploring the region and encountering these different groups of enemies and basically killing them. Now, as you kill them, you gain more regional info and data, and especially for completionists, I think if you really want to get the most out of everything, you have to do all of these encounters. And while you're doing them, there's like these requirements that appear for you to get maximum intel. So it will be like you have to pressurize an enemy, or you have to stagger an enemy before killing it, and you have to defeat it before a certain time restraint. So if you can do all of these, then it's going to work out better. Now, in order to not waste time, I encountered each of these 4 once, and I think of the 4 times that I encountered these guys, only one of them I got all 3 requirements first time. But obviously I hadn't played the game for a long time, and I was still very rusty, so I wasn't too worried about it. But it's the kind of thing, again, that will keep you playing. If you're interested in that kind of thing, and you have a completionist mentality, I'm sure that especially in like the bigger areas, you could be spending quite a lot of time doing these encounters and trying to fulfill all of these requirements to get all of the regional data for that section. I'm not going to talk about the gameplay itself, I'm leaving that for later. I'm just talking about what's kind of available to do while you're exploring. So you had that stuff. Outside of that, the interesting part was that I didn't really see that many random encounters kind of just scattered around. Again, might be different for the main game because they want you to focus on these like specific regional data encounters, so I wouldn't say that's indicative of how it's going to be in the main game, but just know that they seem to have introduced this kind of regional data element that's tied to fighting and defeating different sets of enemies. So it's definitely a fairly unique approach, but I think it's quite nice because obviously by definition when you open up the map you're going to see these like 4 different encounters that you need to face, and intuitively while you're exploring around you're going to try to make sure you do that. So it's more motivation to make sure you don't just beeline it through a more open area to continue the story, but you actually go off the main track to find these different groups of enemies and to explore the region more fully. So I definitely think that a lot of stuff is trying to contribute to this element of exploring and trying to make the best of these open regions. A final note on the exploration / traversal side, when it comes to the more linear areas, like for example Demo 1 with Cloud and Sephiroth, what I found there, like one of the first things I noticed, because the Sephiroth demo is the first one that you can play, I noticed that there's a little bit more kind of verticality and a little bit more actual like climbing and environmental options for Cloud as you move through the game. So it's not like a massive game changer or anything, it's nothing too crazy, but there seems to be more ledges that he can jump onto, and just like the traversal seems a little bit more free-flowing and not on rails as much as it was in Final Fantasy VII Remake. So I think that's a nice welcome little change from the first game, and so you will have a few more opportunities to do things like that, and of course the game will be more likely to reward you for it, because you'll be able to find maybe more unique chests and items and materia and that kind of stuff as a result of doing a little bit more work with jumping around and climbing and that kind of thing. So overall, in terms of the exploration side of things, I really liked what I saw, and it was very encouraging for me, because it truly shows me that they've gone to the effort of making these bigger regions. Yes, it's not open world. I think people get a bit too obsessed with the phrase open world. It's almost as if it's not open world, it's immediately bad. I've never really had that feeling, and I probably never will. But for this game, I think it's a really nice hybrid. So as me and probably most others predicted before this game was ever announced and showcased, there's going to be sections where you're more forced into a linear path where you need to progress the story or complete a flashback, and you're just much more restricted. And then there's going to be areas where you're more out in the open, you're going to be able to explore a bit more, and you're going to get a true feeling of the world that you're playing in. And for me, the Junon area definitely gave me some of that feeling. So just in general, the scale, the quality of the visuals, everything that you can do with the Chocobo, like in this demo obviously we could only run, but from the trailer that came out later you can see that you can use them to climb, you can use them to fly, they're able to sniff out items, you can find and follow the baby Chocobos in order to find more of these Choco stops and unlock fast travel points. So the Chocobo implementation in this game is truly deep. Probably the deepest basically since Final Fantasy VII, so there's really heavy focus on those Chocobos this time around. And so yeah, the items scattered around, the points of interest, the regional data related battles that you have to fight, there's definitely an effort and a focus on trying to get you to enjoy the exploration sections and not just bomb it through to the next story bit. One of my criticisms with Final Fantasy VII Remake was that there was too much padding in the game, and I definitely stand by that. It was far from a perfect game. For this one, I think and hope that they replace the padding of 7 Remake with more organic and fun exploration instead. I'd rather add like 10 hours to my run by just exploring, looking for items, fighting like regional data battles, as opposed to, I don't know, making a dungeon that just has 10 more corridors of the same random encounters just to make it longer and keep me playing more. So I do like what I've seen of this approach so far, and so the exploration and traversal is looking really fun and exciting to me. So next up, I'm going to talk more about gameplay related things. Now, I've always said it and I'll say it again, Final Fantasy VII Remake is my favorite modern, let's say modern being like since Final Fantasy X, battle system, because it's got that really nice hybrid of feeling quite action oriented and fast paced at times, but it still retains that ability to slow it down using tactical mode, and you can choose the moves, you can be strategic, you've got your status ailments, you've got your buffs and your debuffs, elemental affinities, and having played 16's like a very action heavy take on the battle system, I was definitely looking forward to going back to this style, which I prefer more. So the battle system was already a winner for me from the start, and the gameplay was always fun, and I was curious to see what kind of iterative changes we had for Rebirth. In general, it feels and plays very similarly to 7 Remake, which is of course a good thing because it's only the next game in the trilogy. If they tried to make much bigger like fundamental changes, I think that would have been a very bad idea. So I would say, like, by and large, it's of course the gameplay system that you know and hopefully love from 7 Remake. That's definitely how it felt to me. We've already seen from the trailers that one of the biggest focuses in terms of the gameplay on the synergy between the party members. Now in this game we're going to have a lot more party members. The demo definitely has a specific focus on trying to get you to use these new synergy skills and synergy abilities, and in the B-roll you're obviously seeing them in action as well. So the general premise here, as you've already seen, is that every party member has basically special moves that they can do with their other party members. So these come in 2 different flavors. The first one are synergy skills. These ones are more like regular abilities. You don't need to charge like those little small synergy ability gauge bars at the bottom. These are not obviously as powerful as those, but they give you like an alternative way to use more regular moves and attack together with your other party members. So this is like the light version of the tag team abilities. But then obviously the more significant one is the one that's literally called synergy abilities. Now you have those little kind of bars at the bottom, and obviously when we first saw that we were speculating on what it is and how it's going to work. Basically every time you expend a bar of ATB, so you basically choose some kind of ability or move with one of the characters, they get to fill up one of those synergy bars at the bottom. And so then eventually in the battle you're going to have enough of those bars filled that, let's say you're controlling Cloud, you're going to go down to synergy abilities, and then you're going to select whichever party member you have enough bars to do that move with, and once you do that, the 2 of them will pair up and unleash, basically it's almost like a semi-limit break that they perform together. They look really cool, they're very powerful, they're very satisfying, and despite having a lot of party members, there's a lot of different combinations, so they've clearly put a lot of time into designing all of these, the animations, the effects, and all of that kind of stuff. And not only that, these abilities can grant you these really cool buffs for the rest of the battle. For example, there's synergy abilities that give you infinite MP for the rest of the battle. So you can imagine how powerful that is. Infinite MP is always going to be huge because there's a lot of spells and a lot of very cool moves you can use to buff and debuff and all of that kind of stuff. So these synergy abilities are incredibly powerful and they're very useful and intuitive to use. The skills also. And so I would say the synergy skills and the synergy abilities are definitely the 2 biggest changes that you will notice from your time playing Final Fantasy VII Remake in the past. So I think you're definitely going to enjoy experiencing that and basically testing out all of the different combos as you move along the story. So I would say that's probably the main gameplay change I noticed. I mean, again, you don't get a huge amount of time with this thing, and because they wanted to focus more on showing you the exploration, the chocobos, and then obviously the synergy abilities and that kind of thing, you can't really get too deep with the amount of time that you had, but that was like my main overall takeaway from the gameplay. It's still as fun as I remember. It's still generally the gameplay that I know and love from 7 Remake, but they've added in like these really cool, extra flashy synergy abilities to give the battles a little more dynamism, to help really show and demonstrate the bond that the team and the party members have together, and to hopefully create some really cool moments that can change the tide of potentially difficult battles. Now from here I will talk a little bit about like the menus and materia. I preferred not to spend like a huge amount of time diving into and reading menus because again we had limited time, but I wanted to just get a feel for what could be a bit different and what could be worth talking about in a video like this. I think one thing I will say is that once again, the materia offerings do seem to be really nicely thought out by the team. Now, what I mean by that is that I noticed materia combinations starting to pop up in Rebirth that would normally take up, for example, 2 slots in the OG or even in Remake, but now they're starting to fuse them together a little bit more to give you a bit more versatility and a bit more options in your slots. So, for example, you now have a materia that has lightning and wind on it together. And so normally that would of course be 2 different materias taking up 2 different slots, but now you can use that on a single slot, which frees you up to use more materia and gain different abilities as you go along. So it's subtle, but I do think it's smart to have more materia that can do multiple jobs. Another example is something like in Remake we had the auto cure materia, which could of course be very useful. Now they just have an auto cast materia, so this expands the usefulness of something like auto cure, and it can expand it out to like potentially buffs and attacking spells as well. It doesn't just have to be cure. In general, of course, there's going to be materia that we haven't seen before. They're going to come up with cool new stuff, but in terms of the implementation of the materia, it's what you remember from 7 Remake. Like, they're not reinventing the wheel when it comes to materia, but I think there are some subtle changes in place that have made things a little bit better and will give us even more options as we play through Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now, this is something related to kind of more like the menus and the gameplay / RPG elements, but it fuses together a lot of different things, and it's another indication of why I think this game is going to be successful. We now have a crafting menu. It's called Item Transmuter, and again, it's not like the most genius, incredible thing that's ever been implemented in a game. It's simple, but it serves a nice purpose. Obviously, being able to craft items is always a powerful thing to do in any RPG-style game. But this one, of course, it makes sure it does a good job of combining it with the previously mentioned exploration elements. So what you can do is you go into this menu, and once you go in there, you're able to craft new items based on what resources you've been picking up in the open world. So I assume it's going to be a mixture of things you can pick up in the open world. You can probably buy some of these resources from shops, and you probably get things dropped from random encounters and potentially bosses too. Now in the demo, for example, when we first open this menu, you're able to craft stuff like Potion, High Potion, Phoenix Down. And so once again, there's more motivation to explore. Make sure you're picking up these resources and you're able to craft things without having to rely on gil or going to and finding shops, which I think is really nice. It is also a little bit deeper than that because you gain craftsmanship points as you go. And of course I have to assume that as you gain more of these points and level up your crafting, you're obviously going to get access to more and more items that could be potentially very powerful for you to use. And I think it synergizes well with the exploration that they're trying to push more of in Rebirth. So I think that was really cool. Now in terms of the fights and battles, they came in a few different flavors. For the first demo with Sephiroth, we had a lot of these like smaller random encounters that, of course, much like we did in the OG, you completely blitz through them with Sephiroth. So he is playable too for this little section, which is awesome. He's not like this auto-commanded character that you can't control at all. So it's really nice to be able to like strafe around as him. He basically kind of warps around. And of course he's got incredibly powerful abilities, and the battles don't last very long. Then when you get to the end of his section, you fight Materia Guardian. Now originally playing the demo, I thought it was Materia Keeper, but it specifically says Guardian. Now I don't know if that means that it's automatically like a different enemy, or they've just called Materia Keeper Materia Guardian in this game. But I think it's pretty cool. I would have to think it's like a predecessor, and we're going to still fight like the real Materia Keeper when we go back there in like the present time of 7 Rebirth. So yeah, fun boss battle. Again, it was a nice excuse for us to utilize the synergy abilities like double helix with Cloud and Sephiroth. It was just really cool to watch, and I had a good time with that boss battle. But I have to say, the bit that I enjoyed the most in terms of the gameplay was being able to fight bottoms well. And of course, in general, 7 Remake I think has done its best to include a lot of the most familiar elements that we know from the OG. And so yes, Bottomswell is in Lower Junon. You get to fight it. It's a nice dynamic battle. It's quite big in scale. There's lots of cool moves to watch. And of course it has the bubble move that it had from the OG as well. So a lot of stuff has been really nicely recreated. And so it really does feel like you are playing the same battle you played in OG, but in an entirely different generation. So I really enjoyed the Bottomswell battle as well. It's called Terror of the Deep now. But yes, it's Bottomswell, of course, from the OG. So that was a lot of fun too. So already from the limited number of battles I did, it's looking like we're going to fight a lot of familiar bosses, and I'm sure some new ones will be thrown into, and it looks like a fun time. So to round things off, I will talk about the story and the world. Now, This is probably the one where I had like the least amount of insight and experience, because obviously they weren't trying to do too much of that stuff in these demos. What I will say is that there were already things that you could start to get a feel for and understand from the 2 demos. Demo 1, as I mentioned, was a Sephiroth flashback, and already you get to spend a bit more time with Sephiroth before he goes mad and starts becoming like the villainous Sephiroth that of course we know from the main game. Now, I already experienced some of that style of Sephiroth from Crisis Core Reunion, and that game went a long way towards helping me kind of see the humanity of Sephiroth and see his past and make him a character that I could like in some respects and empathize with and that kind of thing. So obviously through the flashback you get to see a bit of a different side to Sephiroth, and already from like the small bits and pieces of dialogue that I saw, he's of course a little bit less intense, he's a little bit more funny, he's a little bit more smiling, a little bit more kind. And of course he's still kind of intimidating and scary, you know what he becomes, but it's definitely fun to experience him like that as well. So I'm definitely going to enjoy seeing more of Sephiroth's story and his transition to becoming who he becomes in the OG. Now, the Junon section was generally, of course, less story focused as well, so much so that I thought the entire demo was literally just exploring outside of Junon, just in that sort of big open region, and then once you continue the story, the demo was going to end. So I spent so much time just like running around and just, you know, checking things out and exploring and digging up treasures and that kind of thing. And then at one point I was like, well, okay, let me just get to the end of this, and worst case, if the demo's over, it's over. It's fine, I've done most of what I want to do now. And it turns out the story continued, and I was like, oh shit, like now do I have enough time to finish everything here? And I just about had enough time. Like they tapped me on the shoulder when I was fighting Bottomswell, and they were like, okay, fine, like we'll let you complete this boss battle, but then we have to kind of stop. And so I was very lucky to manage to actually complete the demo. Now, I will say that going into Lower Junon again was one of those moments that really just gave me so much hope and hype for the main game. One thing that I think Remake has done an absolutely stellar job of is quite literally recreating the characters and the areas that we know from the OG. So for example, like when I went to Aerith's house in Final Fantasy VII Remake, like that just felt so right to me. And even a place like Lower Junon, which in the grand scheme of things is not that important a place, but even here I started to make my way towards Lower Junon, and I was like, whoa, like this area is quite big, it's detailed, there's a lot of NPCs around here, it looks like quite a bustling village slash town. And again, just like the general faithfulness and quality of the recreation was already really exciting to me. But then, of course, came the question of, well, what's going to happen now? Because all of us that have played the OG, we know the general order of events that happen in Lower Junon. And I think what happens there in terms of like the structure is probably going to be quite indicative of how they're going to approach this game in general. Now, Nomura is already on record, there's like a PlayStation blog post where they interviewed the main like creative team. He's already on record as saying that the game is going to be up to the Forgotten Capital, and you're going to see areas that of course you know from the OG, but the party might be traveling them in a different order to what you experience in the original. Now, in OG Junon, of course, what happens is that you get there, you meet Priscilla, Priscilla's in trouble, you have to defeat Bottomswell, then you do the CPR minigame with Priscilla, you bring her back to life, and then from there you get to basically move on and head up towards Junon proper. So that's generally what we know. But then we came here, and then Priscilla immediately sort of comes to you and says, you know, there's a situation, you have to help, and immediately you get sucked into what's going to be obviously the Bottomswell battle. And so I ran down there, and then all of a sudden in the cutscene you see that Yuffie's there. And I was like, whoa, what the hell, like Yuffie? So obviously they're going to change some things around. So now you are going to meet Yuffie in Lower Junon, and Yuffie is going to be the catalyst for you to fight Bottomswell. Now, yes, is this not the same as the OG? Of course it's not. But it's not one of those things where I saw that and I was like, oh man, like they changed it, why have they changed this? It was just like, okay, whatever. Still the same area, still the same boss, still the same general story path. It's just a different way for Yuffie to kind of meet the party and enter the story. That's cool. And so immediately I just got involved in the boss battle and I enjoyed myself. So it wasn't too big a deal, but things are going to happen in different ways to what we're used to, even for some of like the main story elements. And so despite that aspect, because so much of it is so faithfully recreated, and when you do see, let's say, an area like Lower Junon, in my mind, I just literally had a picture of the OG Lower Junon and the new one, and I'm kind of superimposing them in my head, and I'm like, this is so cool. And even details like, let's say, Mr. Dolphin being there as well, and, you know, the Bottomswell battle that you have, all of it, there's just this really nice feeling of nostalgia, and this feeling of, this is so cool to be able to experience this in this kind of style and quality. And so for me at least, so far, based on what I experienced in the demos, that feeling really overrides like the whole, you know, oh, but this isn't exactly the same as the OG, this is playing out differently. The game so far, at least, it seems to have a way to just get you excited, get you hyped, get you involved, and make you still feel like you're playing the Final Fantasy VII story. In that sense, it looks to be successful, because the trailers have shown us that there's going to be some shit that we're going to be seeing that's going to be different from the original story. We have to concede that at this point. I've always said for years I really do hope it follows the OG story closely. It may indeed end up still doing that. We might still get a lot of the same things and a lot of the same pathways, and we might still end up, like the final point we end up in might still be very similar, but there's going to be a lot more twists and turns that we haven't seen. There's going to be characters we probably haven't seen before that are going to be present in this retelling of the story. There's going to be things happening in different ways and in different orders. So Yuffie's a good example. She of course still ends up joining the party, but you don't meet her in the same way that you met her in the OG. And so these things are going to happen. But as long as the game continues to do what it does well, like giving you really cool, faithful recreations of the areas, making the characters feel like they are the true remade versions of the originals, giving us boss battles that are familiar, but we get to play a whole different modern take and a whole different system on them. I think all of that stuff coming together is going to override any changes that we see, especially, of course, provided that the changes are implemented in a reasonable and enjoyable manner, which at the moment I definitely have faith is going to be the case. So that's my general feeling on this demo. I was hyped before, I'm even more hyped now. I'm definitely really looking forward to be able to play more of this, because so far at least, other than the whole, you know, there's two timelines now, and Zack appears to be alive, he's cheated death, all of that element, that obviously casts like a shadow of doubt. Like, how are they going to navigate all of this? And am I going to enjoy that in terms of the story implementation? That's obviously a question mark. But it's a question mark that overall I'm still positive about, because I genuinely do believe that they are still trying to ultimately tell the same story. They might be telling it in a different way, and it might come together in a way that I wasn't expecting, but I do think where we end up and the story that they do tell is probably still going to be faithful to the ideas and the themes and the moments that they wanted to show from their original telling of the story in 1997. So I still keep the faith, and when you take that element out of it, almost everything is just super exciting and super hype. And so I'm generally just really looking forward to this one, and I cannot wait for February the 29th, 2024 when we get to play. Now, I will conclude with a couple of things that did take the shine off a little bit, because yes, I was invited by Square Enix and I'm eternally grateful, and it was one of the best days I've had in a long time. It was just absolutely magic to be able to, after all of these years, actually go into like a Square Enix office and just spend some time there. It was truly amazing. But that doesn't mean I don't get to share my truthful opinions on what I played. So there's two things I want to touch on here, because once I left the demo room, after I've had my kind of like, you know, positive hype, this is so cool, blah blah, there were two things that lingered in my head. The first was that, as I've said before, what I love about Final Fantasy VII Remake was that, for me at least, they found a way to still make it quite action-oriented and dynamic and fast-paced, but also tactical if you wanted to play that way and when it was necessary. There would be a lot of battles where, especially at the start, you want to work the ATB, then you want to get some buffs in, you want to utilize debuffs, you want to utilize status ailments, you want to utilize elemental weaknesses. All of this kind of stuff played a role for me, and it helped the gameplay feel a lot more complete and still harken back to the OG Final Fantasies, where I try to utilize those elements as I play. Now, for this one, of course, all of those same things are still there. You still have all of your buffs, all of your debuffs, all of your status ailments, all of your elemental stuff. It's all there. They haven't taken anything away, which is good, and why this is still just something that's on my mind. It's not necessarily a criticism, it's just something I'm thinking about for the future. Now, we have all of those things there, but what we've had added in are two things that are much more action and spectacle oriented and not really tactical. So what I mean by this is that, let's say you're playing through a game, let's say you're starting to get the hang of these more synergistic abilities, and you start seeing how powerful they are. It could potentially cause the gameplay to slide more into action spectacle and less into kind of action tactical. It could potentially be difficult where, say, you're playing and you're looking for those synergy ability ATB bars, and as soon as they fill up, you know how powerful they are, so you want to immediately use them. So will the synergy abilities and how powerful they are, like the skills plus the abilities, will they become such a strong element of the gameplay that you're going to focus a lot more on just charging those up as soon as possible and just firing them off? It's almost like having an extra half limit break available. So is it going to make the game a bit more imbalanced And is it going to sort of take away a bit from the tactical and the thinking side of the experience? That's just something that was on my mind. Obviously, I drew no conclusions from the demo that I played, but it was something that just made me think, because obviously, if these abilities are there and there's a strong focus on them, then obviously you're going to use them. It would be silly to kind of have a whole bunch of synergy abilities available and you just ignore them because you want to cast Protect, for example. Whereas you could use these synergy abilities and probably end the battle. So that's what I mean. It's something that was on my mind a little bit, but we'll just have to wait and see how it's going to all play out for the main game. Because of course they've given us probably way more than we would normally get at this stage. And so this isn't a representative experience on that front, but it did make me think. So that's one thing. And the second thing, again, it's a minor one, and it's to do with kind of being out in the world and exploring. For this one, I have a bit of a kind of sensitivity to party member interaction. It's something I talk about a lot in these games, especially in these bigger games where there's more open regions, where you have a lot more downtime that's not specific to the story. Now, what I like to see personally with this stuff is that if you do have a bunch of party members that are supposed to be either bonding or already closely bonded, I want to hear them just talking to each other. Like when they're out in the world and they're exploring, I want them to crack jokes to each other, I want them to say things to each other, I want them to tell stories, whatever it might be. And so there are examples of games that do a really nice job of this. And in recent times, I always think of God of War Ragnarok, where whenever you're exploring with like Kratos, Mimir, and Atreus, Freya, they will deliberately have these moments where, let's say you need to do like, you know, a 2-minute traversal to an area. They'll start telling a story, like one will ask a question and they'll start telling a story. Then you reach a destination or a fight and they'll stop and then they'll continue. Things like that I think are really cool. And in this story, because I love the cast and the party members so much, that's something I love to see in this game too. Now, when I was out exploring in Junon, it felt like there was almost no real dialogue or talking between the party members, which is something I would have loved to have seen. I criticized 16 for it as well, multiple times, and so this game I'm still hoping has a bit more of that. It's still too small a sample size to really comment on it, but I think for the Junon section especially, I was hoping to hear like a little bit more dialogue and interaction between the characters. It seems very focused on like you go find stuff, sniff stuff out, fight, find points of interest, find choco stops, do all of that kind of stuff, as opposed to, hey, you know, we're exploring and maybe over the next half an hour there's going to be 10 minutes where you're just on your chocobo getting from A to B and just looking around and doing stuff. You could fill that in with a little bit more kind of, you know, just talking to each other or anything like that. But so far, at least, I didn't see too much indication of that, which is something I would have appreciated. But in the grand scheme, again, it's a minor thing and it's something I'm more personally sensitive to. But again, having completed the demo and had some time to think on it, those were the two elements, I think, that have stuck out to me as just question marks, just things that I'm more curious to see how they will be in the full game. But overall, as I say, just massively impressed by what I saw and just really happy, had a lovely time with the demo. And as someone that's already such a fan of 7 Remake, this game it feels unlikely that it can't be better than 7 Remake, because it has so many of the same elements that I love from it, but it has a bigger world, it has more diverse areas. It's going to hopefully be able to tell more of an expansive and complete story, because story-wise, obviously, it was so difficult to have like a big 3-arc story all within Midgar, that now that we have all of these extra regions and all of this extra story to do, surely I think story-wise it's going to be more entertaining and expansive than the first game too. And so I think when you put all of the elements together, I feel like all of the ingredients are in place to make this game better than 7 Remake. And if it is better than 7 Remake, 7 Rebirth, like if I had to put my money on right now, I would say it's probably going to be my favorite Final Fantasy since Final Fantasy X. But we will just have to wait and see, my friends. So for now, I got to have this amazing preview, and just thank you so much to Square Enix for the opportunity. It's been amazing. I've received review codes and stuff from them in the past, but this was just next level. And to be kind of trusted with this kind of access and to have the privilege of bringing it to you guys, it's just a massive honor, and I really do appreciate that. And of course, the reason I can even do any of this is because of you guys. Everyone that's been watching the videos, everyone that's followed me on social media, you've helped me to kind of grow the Dansgo8 name. It's not something I ever imagined would really happen. I've always tried to grow my channel organically, and what I mean by that is by literally just making the best content possible. I think there's a lot of things I could have done to try and, you know, boost my social medias and get more followers, become more of a quote-unquote influencer kind of guy. And I think everyone watching this knows that I just don't really fit that prototypical profile of an influencer. I'm just someone that's tried to do their best with what I have, share my passion with everyone, make the best videos that I can, and eventually, over the course of 15 long years, I've started to become a bit more influential in the space. And so, of course, I have to thank you guys so much for just collectively helping to grow the channel. Even Square Enix themselves now are noticing the channel enough to give me an opportunity like this. And so I'm just so grateful to all of you guys and to Square Enix as well. So if you'd like to continue to see me get these kinds of opportunities and share them with you in the best, most honest way that I can, please continue to support the channel and the social medias, because that is obviously the most objective way in which I can show that I do have an awesome following of people that are interested in my experiences and what I have to say about these games. So thank you all so much for listening. I will hopefully share more about Final Fantasy Rebirth if and when I find out. Hopefully you guys are excited as I am, and even if you're not, hopefully we get a few more trailers and maybe like another demo or something like that that could potentially change your mind. But if you ask me, the future is bright and this game is going to be great. Thank you for watching. See you soon. Take care.